6 in the morning. A cold September dawn in Stearns County, Minnesota, and Nora Halverson is standing knee-deep in dark water inside a stone spring house, lifting a tall steel milk can up out of the current. Her breath hangs white. The water runs over her boots at about 50 degrees, steady as it has run for 100 years. Around her stand the cans, 40 of them. The same old steel cans her neighbors had been selling for $2 apiece as rusty yard art, planters, mailbox posts, junk by the fence. She bought them back. She carried them home in the bed of her father's truck, and she lowers milk from 11 cows into this flowing well water the way her grandmother once did, because the bank said no, and the compressor on her bulk tank is dead. 2 weeks earlier, in the co-op parking lot, the field man, Dale Brunner, had laughed until he had to lean on his door. "Milking into antiques," he told her, loud enough for Marcus Feld, the man with 400 cows, to hear and laugh too.
She did not argue. She wrote the water temperature in a notebook and drove home.
Then a state inspector came up the gravel to shut the whole thing down. He ran his test, and the numbers on his own sheet stopped the argument cold. How does the oldest cooling method in the county beat a modern bulk tank on a plate count? That is the whole question. But to understand what she kept alive, you have to go back. Back to 2019, to a cold barn and a fresh grave. If you have ever been told your idea was worthless, this story is for you. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. November of 2019, and the barn was colder than the yard. Nora Halverson, 17 then, sat on an upturned bucket with her forehead against the flank of a cow named Pearl, listening to the milk hiss into a pail. Her father, Eric Halverson, had died in October, a heart that quit while he loaded round bales in the North Field.
He left her 40 acres, 11 cows, a mortgage the bank held close, and a bulk tank whose compressor already groaned like a sick animal. She did not cry in the barn. She milked. She scraped the alley. She wrote the weights in a green notebook because her grandmother had written them there first, in a slanted hand going back to 1966. Ingrid Halverson had shipped milk in steel cans off this same farm, down to the Creamery Road on a wooden stand by the mailbox, and every page carried a number. Pounds shipped, water temperature in the spring house, the date the ice went out. Her mother, Karen, stood in the kitchen door most evenings and said little. There was no money for a new tank. The loan officer in St. Cloud had already said foreclosure, quietly. Nora read the old pages by lamp until the columns ran together. One line, underlined twice, stopped her. 50 degrees at the trough, all summer, her grandmother had written. Keep sweet 3 days. She closed the book. Outside, past the frost on the window, the low stone roof of the spring house sat dark against the snow, forgotten, its door swollen shut for 30 years. Spring of 2020. A Saturday auction outside Melrose, and Nora Halverson stood at the back of the crowd with a folded roll of bills in her coat pocket. On a hay wagon sat a line of old steel cans, dented, painted, one turned into a mailbox post with the flag still bolted on. The auctioneer, a heavy man named Roy Tesmer, tapped the first can with his cane. $2, he called. Who wants a planter? Nobody bid. She raised one finger. By noon, she had loaded 9 cans into the truck bed, and over 3 months of sales, she carried home 40, some for $2, some for $1.25, off porches and fence lines from Freeport to Albany. Word travels in dairy country. At the co-op the next week, Dale Brunner watched her back the truck up to the loading dock with the cans rattling. "You planning to plant flowers, Nora, or milk into them?" he said. Marcus Feld leaned against his 400-cow reputation and grinned. "Girl bought the whole county's junk," he told the men by the coffee pot. "Milking into antiques while the rest of us run tanks." She let the talk roll past her.
She wrote the day and the count of cans in the green notebook, 40 now, and closed it. That night she pried the swollen door of the stone spring house off its frame with a wrecking bar, and the cold breath of the water rolled out over her boots, 50 degrees and moving. She held the lantern up, looked at the empty trough her grandmother had used, and reached for the first can. The milk truck idled at the end of the lane while Nora Halverson carried her cans up from the spring house, one at a time. It was a morning in June of 2020.
She had milked at 5, strained the pails, set the tall cans down in the flowing trough, then gone out to the barn to bed the calves and scrape the alley. Chores ran long. By the time the driver hooked his sample dipper over the rim, 3 of the cans had stood an hour on the granary floor in the warm air while she finished, sweating beads down their steel sides. She wrote the pickup weight in the green notebook, the same as always. 2 days later, the co-op slip came back with a red stamp. Bacteria count too high. The load off her farm had failed. She read it at the kitchen table, and her mother Karen set down a cup and said nothing. Nora went back to Ingrid's old pages that night and ran her finger down the summer column until she found the line she had skipped. Keep them in the water till the truck comes, never on the floor. That was the whole mistake.
A can standing in 50-degree water sheds its heat into the current fast. But a can left in June air holds it, and warm milk lets the bacteria double and double again. She had cooled the milk right, then walked away and let it climb. She underlined the sentence twice and set her alarm for 4. Late in August of that summer, Nora Halverson pulled the lid off an evening can, and the smell rose before the lantern light reached it. Sour. The whole milking, 40 pounds, gone ropey along the rim. She poured it to the barn cats and turned the lid over in her hands. The rubber gasket had gone hard and cracked. A thin seam of air got in over the warm hours, and the count climbed. Bacteria that double every 20 minutes in the heat had feasted on what the seal should have kept out. She wrote it in the green notebook and drove the next morning to the low white house past Freeport, where Alma Reinhardt lived. Alma had shipped cans off her own place for 30 years before the tank trucks came, and her hands still knew the trade. Nora traded a week of chores, hauling wood, feeding Alma's heifers, for what the old woman carried in her head. You bought good steel and bad rubber, Alma told her, holding a lid to the window. The can never fails. The gasket does. She showed her how to boil the seals soft, how to press a thumb to feel the give, how to swap them out every season, the way Ingrid once had. That afternoon, Alma walked the spring house trough, felt the current, and nodded once. Nora fitted new gaskets to all 40 lids by lamplight and set them to boil. If a cracked seam of rubber could sour a whole milking, what else had her grandmother known that the notebook only half said? The last week of September in 2020, and the co-op slip came back with a number Nora Halverson had never seen next to her own name. Standard plate count, 8,000. She set it beside the printout the driver had left by mistake, the running averages for the route, and ran her finger down the column. The big farms sat in the tens of thousands. Marcus Feld's 400 cows, 31,000. Her 11, cooled all night in the moving trough, came in lowest on the sheet. She drove the cheese to a low cinder block shop in Cold Spring, where a man named Theo Marchetti made aged raw milk rounds and sold them off a folding table. He dipped a thief into her can, smelled it, tasted, and looked at the count sheet she laid on the steel bench. Clean milk, he said. Cleaner than what I buy now. I'll take everything you can carry. He signed for it in pencil on the back of an invoice, and it was the first name on paper that had ever wanted what came out of her spring house. That night, Karen Halverson picked the test sheet up off the kitchen table. She read the number once, set it down, then lifted it and read it again. She did not say a word.
She folded it in half along the crease and slid it under the sugar tin, where Ingrid's letters had always been kept. The green notebook lay open beside the lamp, the low count written in, the pencil still lying across the page where Nora's hand had left it. A gray afternoon in October of 2020, and Nora Halverson carried empty cans into the granary. She had 40 of them now, more than the milk needed, and Ingrid's notebook held a second column she had not tried yet. Oats and shelled corn sealed in steel and set against the wall. She scooped dry oats with a coffee can, poured them into the neck, pressed the boiled gasket down, and clamped the lid the way Alma had shown her. 30 cans she filled that week and lined along the cool north wall. The trick was in the notebook, half a line in pencil. Full can, tight lid, the bugs eat the air and die. A steel can packed with dry grain has only the oxygen trapped between the kernels, and any weevil sealed inside breathes it down to nothing in a few weeks and starves for want of it. She wrote the date on each lid in grease pencil. She had rushed 1 can. The oats off the last cutting had gone in a shade damp, and she knew it as she clamped it, and clamped it anyway. In January, she pried that one open on the granary floor. The smell reached her before the lid cleared the rim. Musty. Warm. Wrong. Mold had bloomed across the top where the moisture had nowhere to go, and the whole can was spoiled to the bottom. She set it aside, wiped her hands, and reached for the moisture meter Alma had lent her, turning to the 29 cans she had not yet opened. A wet morning in November of 2020, and a white state car turned in at the Halverson mailbox before Nora had the cows out. The inspector was a square man named Gerald Voss, clipboard under his arm, boots already wrong in the barn muck. He walked the spring house, lifted a lid, wrote. He walked the milk room, opened the cooler log, wrote more. Nora stood by the trough with her hands cold and still. Grade A milk moves in a bulk tank, Voss told her, not unkind. Cans went out of the rules before you were born. Count doesn't matter, the vessel does. He tore the yellow sheet along its perforation and held it out. She read it twice, her thumb pressing flat along the edge of the paper. Failure to maintain approved bulk cooling. 30 days. The same afternoon, the co-op called. Dale Brunner's voice on the line, flat and sorry at once. 11 cows did not fill a route. The truck burned more diesel turning down her lane than her milk was worth, and now the paper gave them the reason they had wanted. The route was gone at month's end. She hung the phone on its hook and stood in the kitchen a long minute. Then she took the green notebook down from the shelf and turned past the low counts, past the gaskets, to a blank page near the back where Ingrid had written 1 line and never used it. Cheese keeps what milk cannot. She read it, uncapped the pencil, and started counting the days she had left against a rule she had not yet found. A thawing afternoon in March of 2021, and the county creamery and Cold Spring smelled of steam and rennet when Nora Halverson carried in the first wheels of aged cheese wrapped in cloth. She had made them the legal way, raw milk held past 60 days, and Theo had driven her to the open house where the creamery hung its yearly board. Behind the tasting table stood the manager, a lean woman named Dolores Kane, tacking the county averages to a corkboard, count column running down the right. Gerald Voss was there too, out of the state car, in a wool coat instead of boots. He had brought the season's test sheets himself. Dolores pinned them in a row, high farms at the top, and at the very bottom of that column, under 1,000 names of cows Nora did not own, sat one number in her own line. 8,000. Lowest on the wall. Marcus Feld came in stamping mud off his boots, poured himself coffee and drifted to the board the way men read a livestock report.
He found his own farm near the top. Then his eye ran down. He set the cup on the table and stood the rest of the way up, reading it again, saying nothing at all. "Cans," Dolores said quietly, tapping the bottom line. "Cooled on well water. No compressor on the place." Voss folded his arms and looked at the floor. Feld had laughed at her in a gravel lot the summer before, 400 cows to her 11. He looked at the number a long moment. Then he picked up his hat off the table, turned it once in his hands, and set it back down. The summer of 2022 came in hot and dry across Stearns County, and the well never faltered.
Nora Halverson stood in the spring house at noon, with her sleeves rolled, lifting cans out of the flowing trough one by one, reading the thermometer taped to the stone. 39 degrees, it said, same as it had read in the killing heat of July and the gray of November. The water came out of the ground near 50 and carried the warmth off the steel as fast as the cows put it in, and she rode it the way Ingrid had, 50 years running. The cheese cave was the old root cellar now, shelved in pine, wheels turning under cloth. Dolores Canny drove out twice a month for all Nora could age past 60 days. A second cheesemaker in Avon signed in the spring. 11 cows still, no more, because 11 was what the spring house held and what the notebook counted. Theo mended the trough lip where a stone had loosened. Alma came Sundays and sat while the wheels were turned, saying little, her hands too stiff now for the work she had taught. Marcus Feld sold half his herd that dry autumn. Feed too costly for 400 mouths. He drove past the Halverson lane one evening and slowed, watching the low stone roof with its steady drip of well water darkening the grass, then drove on without a word. An autumn evening in Stearns County, and the last light lay along the fence line where the old cans stood in a row, 40 of them, steel gone soft gray with weather. Nora Halverson walked the line with the green notebook under her arm and stopped where the cold open had begun, at the trough her grandmother filled before her. She lifted a can and set it in the flowing water and watched the surface shiver. The whole thing had always been simple in her hands. Warmth is what bacteria feed on, and every hour the milk sits near blood heat, their number doubles again. A can standing in air keeps its heat like a stone in the sun.
Set that same tall can in water coming off the ground near 50 degrees, and the water pulls the warmth away through all that narrow steel, far faster than air ever could. The ground does not tire, and the spring does not quit. No compressor to die, no bank to ask. She dried her hands on her jeans and wrote the evening temperature the way Ingrid had, 39 degrees. One more line in 50 years of lines. The oldest cooling method in the county had beaten the bulk tank. That was the whole of it. Here is what the cold water taught her, and it is worth keeping. The newest thing is not always the answer. Sometimes what your grandmother knew is still true, waiting in a stone room for someone quiet enough to read it. What did your grandmother know that you almost forgot? Tell us in the comments, and tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe, and we'll be back next week with another.